The honourable member will still have 1 minute left of questions and comments after question period. Déclaration de députés, statements by members. The honourable member for Humber River, Black Creek.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is deeply disturbing to hear about the growing persecutions of the Ahmadi Muslim community around the world. In recent weeks, the media burst with the news about the unlawful raids, detentions, and killings of Ahmadi Muslims in Burkina Faso and Pakistan. The safety of the community in Afghanistan, Algeria, and Sri Lanka is also deeply concerning. No individual should be persecuted for one's right to freedom of religion. Everyone, alone or in a community, publicly or privately, has a universal right to practice and manifest his or her religion. Here in Canada, we are proudly enjoying the ability to freely practice our faith. Ahmadi Muslims in Canada take this freedom and give back generously by consistently helping those in need, raising funds for local hospitals and other charities. By standing here today with my colleagues, I hope to bring the world's attention to the serious human rights violations against Ahmadiyya Muslims, that community around the globe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Bellechasse.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Hello, Mr. Speaker. From now through the 12th of February, all Canadians will be able to let loose and have fun at the 69th Quebec City Winter Carnival. Carnival goers are invited to experience a bunch of new activities such as toboggan run at the fortifications, a silent disco, music nights at the Bonhomme Ice Palace featuring many types of music like electronic, francophone music, hip-hop, and new country. You can visit this grandiose palace, which has a 45-foot tower. In the classic activities, we still have them, of course, 2 night parades, the sculpture tour, the famous canoe race, and the snow bath are back. You can even know, Mr. Speaker, that even the Today Show came on site to do 2 live broadcasts and launch the festivities. I invite you to discover or rediscover the Quebec City Carnival, Mr. Speaker, which is the biggest winter carnival in the world. It makes our country and our traditions shine all around the world. Bonhomme Carnaval says he cannot wait to meet you and also can't wait to give you a big hug. Happy Carnival.
The honourable member for London North Centre.
An incredible organization in London, Ontario, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, or YOU. Founded in 1982, their centre has continuously focused on the well-being of youth finding themselves in a variety of challenges. The organization focuses on mid-teens and late 20s, kids experiencing challenges in search of a better future in a way that affirms their dignity. The help takes different forms. Sometimes it's as simple as providing a hot meal. Other times it's more complex, and most times, in fact, is more complex. They run a state-of-the-art youth shelter that makes sure that young people have a second chance when needed. They provide skills and employment training. They also make available affordable housing spaces. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working with the organization and seen the results firsthand. This Friday marks the 17th annual YOU Breakfast, its signature fundraiser. The youth speaker is Cheyenne Vanderwood. Thank you, Cheyenne, for having the courage to share your story. Thank you also to Steve Cordis, the board, the staff, and all the supporters. YOU has made and will continue to do extraordinary things in our community. Thank you very much.
L'honorable député de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, from February 10th to 12th, we will celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Valcourt Ski-Doo Grand Prix. The snowmobile is a Quebecois invention. It's a strong symbol of pride and ingenuity for our entire region. The snowmobile has also contributed to the business model of Quebec's SMEs, which has flourished over the years. Moreover, in connection with history, the vintage aspect of the invention of the snowmobile will be honored this year, allowing us to see the evolution of the snowmobile. For 40 years, this Grand Prix event has been a landmark event for regional and even international tourism. In the heart of winter, snowmobiling is important for our economy. It makes the whole Valcourt region vibrate and thrive. The snowmobile is also 40 years of history. Racers of different categories have flown around the oval to the great delight of spectators, young and old. This is why this year the organization is encouraging families to come and enjoy the event, thus opening the doors to the next generation of our current athletes because, Mr. Speaker, we are Ski-Doo.
Speaker, I rise today to honor a long-standing volunteer in my community of Canada, Carleton, Cheryl Gingra. Cheryl has volunteered in dozens of roles in multiple organizations and communities her entire adult life. She is a devoted community organizer, communicator, and contributor in helping shape women's policies. Her leadership through our local Liberal women's clubs has been nothing short of inspiring. Cheryl has had a long and courageous battle with cancer, yet she's remained steadfast in her leadership. Cheryl is now in the loving care of the amazing team at the Rudy Shankman Hospice in Canada. And I am reminded of the quote, "The purpose of life is not to be happy, but to matter, to be productive, to be useful, and have it make some difference that you lived at all." Cheryl, you have made such a tremendous impact. Your life and your dedication for those around you and the causes that matter most have impacted so many. God bless. Thinking of you, Cheryl, Sebastian, and your family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Mr. Speaker, this week I have a very special member of my community, Chris Morant, who has celebrated his 100th birthday. Chris is a World War II veteran who joined the British Air Force at the age of 18. Training as an electrical technician, Chris served in the 182nd Squadron of the Royal Armed Forces, servicing commandos who repaired planes and equipment near the front line. After landing in France, he supported the front line as they proceeded to liberate France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Denmark. After the war, he stayed in the Netherlands for 2 years to help rebuild the country. As a descendant of Dutch immigrants, I would like to express my deepest gratitude for Chris's service. If it wasn't for the bravery and heroism like men like Chris, I wouldn't be here today. Chris and his family have since moved to Canada and are calling Strathroy home for the last 30 years. Chris, happy 100th birthday, and thank you for your service.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to mark the 75th anniversary of Sri Lanka's independence, a country that is both morally and economically bankrupt today. Since independence, Sri Lanka has gone to the IMF for bailouts 17 times. That's more than once in every 5 years. Its leaders stand accused of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. On January 10, 2023, Canada imposed sanctions on 2 former presidents of the island, including Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa. If Sri Lanka is to reach its true potential, it must deal with its demons. It must reduce its bloated military spending, address accountability for atrocities committed, recognize the Tamils' right to self-determination, and be a country governed by the rule of law. Continued failure by its leaders will further drive what many have called the pearl of the Indian Ocean into the ground and risk repeating the mistakes of the past. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with Anna from my riding of Hamilton East, Stony Creek, who highlighted the need to expand the eligibility of the Canada Caregiver Credit. Like thousands of other Canadians, Anna has provided countless hours of care to a loved one at home, much needed support that has allowed her husband to age in place. As Canadians age, they need our support. One of the most impactful ways we can do this is by supporting those who care for them. The Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence states that Canadians spend 5.7 billion unpaid hours each year on caregiving. That's hundreds of thousands of spouses, parents, and children taking care of the ones they love at home. At a time when our long-term care and healthcare systems are overwhelmed, we must do more for Canadians who care for their loved ones. More caregivers would benefit by expanding the scope of the Canada Caregiver Credit into a refundable tax credit and by increasing the income cap for claiming the same. Thank you, Anna, and all caregivers across Canada for the value support you provide.
The Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, Canadians are out of money. They can't afford to eat, heat, or house themselves. Recently, I received an email from a constituent, a 49-year-old disabled man who lives on $1,100 per month. He states, "It has never been easy, and lately things have gotten much worse. The price gouging has left me with no option but to not eat anything for several days each month. It has literally come to the point where I must decide between food and shelter. And given we are Canadians, I must choose shelter. Mr. Speaker, Canada is a G7 country, but now Canadians are forced to choose between eating or having a roof over their heads. Canadians are hurting. Everything feels broken. The next Conservative government will clean up this mess, will scrap the punitive carbon tax, groceries, home heating, and everything else will become affordable for my constituents and all Canadians. Conservatives will keep the heat on and remove the tax. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Surrey Centre.
Today I'm proud to welcome and acknowledge an impactful and important organization within my constituency of Surrey Centre. The Métis Nation of British Columbia has traveled to Ottawa to continue their work and valiant advocacy in pursuing the realization of their self-governance agreement with Canada. Representing 39 Métis communities and over 98,000 people in British Columbia, the organization strives to develop and enhance opportunities for Métis communities by implementing culturally relevant social and economic programs and services. Their vision is to build a self-governing, sustainable nation in recognition of inherent rights for our Métis citizens. Welcome to Ottawa.
Foothills.
Survey on mental health showed the stark reality facing Canadian farmers. When asked about the biggest source of stress and anxiety, for the first time, it wasn't commodity prices, and no, it wasn't the weather. The biggest threat to their family farm operation for Canadian farmers is Liberal government policy. More than 8 years of Liberal tax hikes and cumbersome red tape has meant the family farm is struggling with their mental and financial health. And when the NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition triples their carbon tax, the average 5,000-acre farm will spend more than $150,000 a year on the carbon tax alone. And after 8 years of Liberal overspending and interest rate hikes, food inflation is at a 40-year high, families are struggling to manage their debt, and the family farm is no longer economically viable. Losing family farms hurts every Canadian family. After 8 years of Liberal attacks, Canadian farmers deserve a break from the Carbon Tax Coalition. To Canadian farmers, please know, Conservatives will keep the heat on and take the tax off.
L'honorable député de Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, allow me to paint a picture of Canada after 8 years under the Liberals. It's not a very pretty picture, even if the Prime Minister says that everything's fine. We have the worst inflation in 40 years. Houses are unaffordable. Food banks are no longer able to provide food. People who work full-time can't make ends meet. Those who used to donate food are now the ones who go to get food donations. This is the situation after 8 years of this Prime Minister. In Quebec, 1/3 of requests for food assistance are for children. Well, this is what Canada has come to. We're a G7 country with working poor and children with empty stomachs. The Liberals have been destroying Canada's economy for 8 years. The least they could do would be to cancel the carbon tax, but no, they want to triple it. But there is hope, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the Conservative Party, once in power, will fix our public finances, he will cancel the carbon tax, and he will put Canadians back in control of their lives so that they no longer have to decide between clothing, food, and housing. The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, I joined my fellow Quebecers in marking Quebec's 33rd Suicide Prevention Week. This year's theme, Mieux vaut prévenir que mourir, focuses on prevention. It invites each of us to break down the stigma associated with mental health, to open up the dialogue, and to help each other. That's why we're working on a national action plan for suicide prevention. The plan will identify concrete actions and performance indicators to improve crisis support and suicide prevention. Our government continues to work with its partners to improve the mental well-being of Canadians to take steps to help prevent suicide. But each of us has a responsibility to act. Talking about mental health and our struggles can make a difference. I therefore ask you all to be bold, to dare to talk about it.
Member for Elmwood Transcona.
As provincial premiers descend upon Ottawa to discuss healthcare funding, debate about healthcare privatization is raging. There are people who say that because there's already some private delivery in the system, we shouldn't be concerned about there being more. But this misses the point. We know that there's for-profit delivery. Like in long-term care, we saw during the pandemic, they had worse health outcomes and higher death rates. The question is whether we want more of that or less of it. Canadians shouldn't trust the advice of conservative governments like the one in Manitoba that plead poverty and call for privatization while closing emergency rooms and giving giant tax rebates. We need provinces to help develop a coordinated strategy to train enough healthcare providers across the entire country. Private centers hire from the same pool. We need a plan to expand that pool of workers, not a plan for discriminatory access based on ability to pay. I exhort the Prime Minister and the Premiers to pay heed as they sit down to chart a course for the next generation of Canadian healthcare.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, Yannick Nézet-Séguin won 2 Grammy Awards last night, and when Yannick Nézet-Séguin wins Grammys, the hearts of all Quebecers burst with pride. Orchestra conductors are very impressive people. They are larger-than-life artists with almost intimidating personalities. But Yannick Nézet-Séguin is different, though. He has all the talent and stature of the greats, but he's so down-to-earth that sometimes we forget that he is one of the titans of our time. After winning his first Grammy Award last night he added 2 more Grammys to his list of accomplishments. After winning 3 trophies at 2 galas, we can bet that this young maestro's success streak will continue among music's elite. With a capital M, we Quebecers will never tire of celebrating his achievements. As conductor of the Orchestre Métropolitain de Montréal and the New York Metropolitan Opera and Philadelphia too, Yannick Nézet-Séguin is breathing new life into classical music. He has truly earned his place on the podium. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, congratulations, Maestro.
The Honourable Member for York Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the toughest Canadian winters ever, not because of the extreme cold. Canadians can handle the cold, but because of the Liberal government's carbon tax. It's minus 30 and freezing in many parts of the country, and after 8 years, the Liberals have made it unaffordable for Canadians to heat their homes. After 8 years, the Liberal carbon tax, home heating bills have risen out of control. After 8 years, Canadians are going to bed cold and hungry while Liberals are warm and comfortable, telling us all we've never had it so good. After 8 years, Liberals don't care that Canadians can't afford to keep out the cold or buy gas and groceries. A shop vac would suck less money out of your pockets than these Liberals. After 8 years, there's no relief. Liberals think the quickest way to get Canadians back on their feet is to make them miss 3 car payments. Conservatives will fight to keep the heat on and take the tax off. We will make life more affordable and warmer for all Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
Highlight the importance of the contribution made from someone in my community, Theodoros Trakas. We lost him in December, just shy of his 100th birthday, but boy did he do so much in those 100 years. He moved to Canada from Greece. He had served in the Greek military, and in fact, when we celebrated the Ohi Day parade along the Danforth, he was there showing his proud contributions of saying Ohi to fascism. But even more than that, he helped build our city, literally helped build Ontario Place with his hands and important places all across our city. He was also a founding member of Maple Leafs Taxi, helped to get us all around the town while making sure we were connected. I am so proud to be able to stand up and to say that we had a wonderful community member in Theodoros Trakas. Thank you to his family for highlighting all of his contributions. Thank you to him for everything he has done.
Bravo. Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, Canadians awoke to devastating images from a massive earthquake in Turkey and Syria this morning, and painful to see the lives lost and the damage done. And we send condolences to the families of the victims and pray for a speedy recovery of those injured. Will the Prime Minister update this House on the Government of Canada's response to the tragedy?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I thank the member opposite for her question and assure her that all Canadians, indeed all parliamentarians, stand together in mourning the loss of so many lives in the devastating earthquakes in Syria and in Turkey. And I can assure her that we're working with partners in the region and around the world to see how we can best help in the short term, knowing that there will also be a need for support in the long term as communities rebuild from this terrible event.
Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 8 years of this Prime Minister's out-of-control spending that even Liberals are starting to notice. Liberals like Bill Morneau, who said the federal government lost the agenda, and Mark Carney, who called inflation homegrown. These aren't just random Liberals, as the Prime Minister says. They were some of the Prime Minister's biggest defenders. They want to know, and Canadians want to know, when will this Prime Minister show some humility, admit responsibility, and end his reckless inflationary spending?
You're right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians remember well in the depths of the pandemic when people pulled together. We stepped up to support people. We stepped up to support our neighbors. Frontline health workers stepped up to support people. These are the things that got Canada through this pandemic with a better record and fewer deaths than just about any of our peer countries. There's a lot of work to continue to do to support Canadians, and this government is unequivocally standing with Canadians to support people who need that help to create better opportunities as we grow the economy for the future.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals can talk about the billions they spent all they want, but never in this country has so much money brought so few results. After 8 years, the facts speak for themselves. The highest inflation in 40 years, the highest interest rates in a generation, the highest home prices ever. Mr. Speaker, a new poll suggests that 45% of Canadians with variable mortgage rates will have to sell their homes in under 9 months. They can say it, but Canadians know that everything's not okay. So I'll ask again, will he show some humility and admit responsibility?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are facing difficult times right now, which is why this government stepped up in the fall with direct support by doubling the GST credit for about 11 million Canadians, by moving forward with dental supports and rental supports for Canadians who needed it, two initiatives that the Conservatives actually voted against. Right. Mr. Speaker, while they are abandoning the middle class, we're going to continue investing and being there for Canadians, not just because it's the right thing to do to support people who need it, but because it's also the smart thing to do to keep our economy growing strongly into the future.
Here, here. Le député de Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, après 8 longs...
Mr. Speaker, after 8 long years with this Liberal government, taxpayers are realizing just how badly this country is being run. Everything's costing more, partly because this government is spending money hand over fist. For example, consulting firm McKinsey received $120 million in contracts from this government, but nobody can tell us why. Not the Prime Minister, his ministers, or his officials, no one. In what universe does the government spend $120 million on contracts and drag the country further into debt without knowing exactly why? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians remember full well that during the pandemic, when everything was uncertain, the federal government was there for them. We invested $8 out of $10 in support for Canadians during the pandemic. The federal government did that because not only did we need to be there for people, because that was the right thing to do, but it was also the smart thing to do, because we saw record growth in jobs and strong economic growth. The reality is that Canadians are suffering now, and we need to continue to be there for them. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer concluded that $200 billion over the $250 billion spent during the pandemic that had nothing to do with the pandemic. Some expenditures included $173 million of taxpayer money into Medicago, which just announced that they're going to close their doors, owned by the Japanese company Mitsubishi. They invested $173 million without figuring out if this company was actually going to lead to long-term jobs. Why are they spending money hand over fist without making even basic checks? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, no one's surprised to see the Conservatives once again attacking our policy of vaccination and suggesting we did not do the right thing by trying to get vaccines, all the different types of vaccines possible, to make sure that Canadians could have access to things that were going to save lives. That's exactly what we did. We were very lucky to have all the vaccines we did because we went through this pandemic in the best way possible. Better than many other countries, we'll continue to be there to support Canadians during these difficult times. That's what this government does. The opposition
is preaching austerity instead. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It took nearly 2 years for the Prime Minister to meet the premiers for Quebec and the provinces. The issue is health transfers, which we've been talking about since the first time I came to this place. This issue is an issue of speed. There are people who are suffering. There are people who are worried. There are people who are afraid. There are people who are waiting. Can the Prime Minister agree with me and say that what ensures speediness in treating people is a quick check and not conditions? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Allow me to correct my honourable colleague and highlight that for 2 years, no Prime Minister has had more meetings with premiers about health. For several weeks at the beginning of the pandemic, we were there to talk with them, to help them to invest $72 billion more in federal money on top of the $40 billion per year that we send to health systems. And I will be pleased to sit down with premiers tomorrow to talk about how we can make our health systems secure for the future. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. The Prime Minister must find it convenient that there was a pandemic to claim that he had great meetings over the phone. But those discussions must have been terrible because they've led to no results. Emergency rooms are overflowing. People are waiting for surgeries. We have mental health issues. We have respiratory issues. Is the minister trying to deliver a service through the provinces to the people that are suffering, or centralize health jurisdiction in his hands in Ottawa? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I am sure, Mr. Speaker, that my honourable colleague will be pleased to know that we agree on the need of getting results from our health systems throughout the country, results for families who can't get a family doctor, results for people who need urgent care for their mental health but have to wait months and months, and people working in emergency rooms. We are there for the provinces. We will invest and we will make sure that results are obtained throughout the country. That's what the premiers want. That's what we all want. And tomorrow, we're going to take an important step in that direction. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, Conservative and Liberal cuts have created a crisis in our healthcare system. When the Prime Minister promised to strengthen our public system, he's confusing privatization with innovation, and he's got it all wrong. The notion of profit must never be part of the conversation when it comes to people's health. Now more than ever, we must invest in our universal public system. More money in the private sector means fewer healthcare workers in the public system. When will the Prime Minister understand that private healthcare is not innovation, it's a step backwards? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we always want to defend our public health care system here in the House, and that's why I'm looking forward to sitting down with provincial premiers and territorial premiers to discuss it. We will continue to defend the Canada Health Act and our public system. We also want to get real results for citizens, whether it be access to a family doctor, mental health support, or help to invest in emergency rooms. That's work that we're going to do hand in hand with the provinces.
Griesbach.
Mr. Speaker, that answer may be good enough for wealthy investors, but it's not good enough for those waiting in line at Alberta's ER. And tomorrow, the Prime Minister is sitting down with the premiers. That includes Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, an advocate for slashing the public healthcare system. And while this winter, Edmonton's Children's Hospital was being overwhelmed, the solutions are clear. Hire more healthcare workers and rebuild public healthcare. Will the Prime Minister, yes or no, ensure every single dollar that goes into the province's hands are paid or going to the public coffers for healthcare?
Yes. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very much looking forward to sitting down with the premiers tomorrow to discuss the future of healthcare in this country, the future of public healthcare in this country. We will ensure that we are standing up unequivocally for the Canada Health Act, ensuring that all Canadians can have access to timely and necessary procedures. We know that's what Canadians expect, whether it's more family doctors, whether it's ending the backlogs on mental health services, whether it's stopping the overwhelming of our ERs. We will be there to invest with the provinces and ensure results for Canadians.
The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, last weekend Canadians watched as Beijing's spy balloon drifted over North America. For years, the government has supported research with China's military, despite the advice of CSIS against doing so since 2018. Admitted Beijing's military scientists into the Winnipeg lab. It's funding research with Beijing's military university in areas like quantum cryptography, photonics, and space science. Does the government now understand the threat this presents to Canada, and will it now issue a ministerial policy directive to ban research funding with China's military?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Established research security guidelines, and we're very clear with universities. If you partner with the federal government on research, your projects will be reviewed on national security grounds. But Mr. Speaker, once again, the Conservatives are just waking up to national security issues. We are working with universities to fill gaps where they exist. Mr. Speaker, we will take the national security issues of this country very seriously. We continue to work with universities, but we did establish a process with universities for research under security guidelines.
For Kildonan, St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of soft on crime Liberals, Canada is seeing a 32% rise of violent crime. Gang murders have doubled in this country. Repeat violent offenders are getting bail over and over again. Once safe neighborhoods have become havens for crime and violence. And in response, premiers, police, Toronto are demanding bail reform from this Prime Minister. And today, the Liberal government can finally take action by voting for the Conservative motion calling for tough on crime bail reform. Will they be voting yes, Mr. Speaker, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve to feel safe, and they deserve to be safe. Mr. Speaker, bail reform has been on our radar screen since a meeting, at the very least, with provincial ministers of justice in late October. Mr. Speaker, we committed at that point to looking at what we could do at the federal level in terms of reforming our bail laws, but also, Mr. Speaker, looking at how we could better support the provinces in the administration of the bail regime that currently exists. Mr. Speaker, we're committed to that, and we'll continue to work in that direction.
I just want to remind certain members that they have beautiful, strong voices, but this is not the place to really let them loose. So I'm sure they don't want to be identified. They're very modest. They don't want us to see who they are. So I just want to remind them that. The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, that answer does not give a lot of comfort that the Liberals are interested in fixing the bail system that they broke.
That's right.
Last week, the Kelowna RCMP issued a public warning about a violent, high-risk repeat offender who escaped from a recovery home who was granted bail in December despite a revolving door of criminal convictions and a history of disobeying court orders.
Wow.
Will the Prime Minister take responsibility, reverse course, and fix the bail system that he broke?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, our bail system is one that creates a number of different balances based on charter rights that individuals have, based on the presumption of innocence until being found guilty, but also, Mr. Speaker, primordial making sure that Canadians are safe. Nobody out on bail, Mr. Speaker, should pose a threat to the security of Canadians. That is, in fact, what the law is. There are a number of reverse onuses in effect already in that law. We're willing to look at other measures within that law. We're working with the provinces and territories in that regard, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to make sure that we keep Canadians safe, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a typical Liberal response where they deflect and blame. There's nothing worth applauding about the Liberals' record on public safety or their record on protecting victims of crime. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, violent crime has increased 32%, gang-related homicides have increased 92%, and every province, territory, and premier agrees that the bail system is broken. So will the Prime Minister fail the bail system he broke, or get out of the way so the Conservatives can?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I assure my colleague and all members in this chamber that we are introducing common sense policies like Bill C-75, which allow us to concentrate on the most serious offenders so that we can protect our communities. I would also point out to my Conservative colleagues that this is a government that has invested hundreds of millions of dollars both to support law enforcement as well as to address the root causes of crime so that we can stop it before it starts. And what have the Conservatives done in each of those instances? They have voted against. Mr. Speaker, if they're serious about taking crime seriously, then they should get serious about supporting this government's policies. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord.
Monsieur le Président, après 8
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years with this Prime Minister, the numbers are worrisome. Violent crime increased by 32%. Gang-related murders increased by 92%. That's where we're at with the Liberals. And why? Because they're setting up policies that benefit criminals instead of victims. Could the minister please protect victims and leave rapists and gangsters where they belong? In jail. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've invested more than any other government in Canadian history in order to protect victims and to make sure that victims are heard in our justice system. As for the conditional liberation system, no one's going to be released who's a threat to Canadian safety. We're going to work with provinces and territories to make sure that we improve the system and support provinces in administering it. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, I can't believe that this minister is trying to protect this bill. There's obviously a problem with the word justice in this minister's office. Thanks to this new law, a gangster caught with illegal loaded guns and a rapist can serve their sentence at home. The Liberal track record after 8 years, a country where victims' rights aren't a priority. Can the minister admit that C5 is a failure and send criminals back to jail so that victims can get justice? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Serious crimes deserve serious consequences. That's the basis that we're going on to move on from the failure of the Harper-era tough-on-crime policies. What we're doing is dedicating resources to serious crimes and not wasting legal and police resources on less serious crimes. We are improving the justice system, and we will continue to do so. The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals from West Island are attacking the Charter of the French Language in committee. You should hear their scare tactics. On Friday, it was the member for Saint-Laurent who resorted to scare tactics. She claimed that thousands of English-speaking seniors are going to lose access to health care, which is completely ridiculous. She claimed that healthcare staff are afraid to offer care in English, when on the contrary, Bill 96 includes the obligation to provide services in English on request all throughout Quebec. Will the minister order her colleagues to stop misinformation when they're debating her own bill? The Honourable Minister for Official Languages. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his question. Mr. Speaker, we are the first government to recognize the use of the French language in Quebec, and we're the first one to recognize that French is threatened throughout Canada. That is why we have a bill that's ambitious and will give more tools to address the decline of French throughout the country. Once again, I'm hoping to get the cooperation from my colleagues because we want to pass this bill. It will make a real difference in the lives of Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, In addition to the member for Saint-Laurent, who claimed that seniors will no longer be cared for if we protect French, there's the member for Westmount, who fought for C-13 not to recognize French as the common language in Quebec, and the member for Mont-Royal piled on. MPs in West Island are joining forces to attack the Charter of the French language and promote the Anglicization of Quebec. Meanwhile, where's the Quebec Liberal lieutenant? Why is he leaving the field open to those undermining the protection of French? The Honourable Minister of Heritage. Mr. Speaker, C-13 recognizes for the very first time that we have to reinforce and protect French in Quebec. It helps Francophones outside Quebec. It gives more power to the Official Languages Commissioner, but in spite of all that, the Bloc is opposed to it. Why? Because they don't want things to work. Because they want an argument. They don't want Parliament to work. But in spite of that, we're going to succeed. The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. Mr. Speaker, every step forward to protect French in Quebec is a step too far for the West Island Liberals. Requiring French in the workplace is too much. Recognizing French as the common language is too much. Ask them to name a single step forward to protect French that suits them. They won't be able to do it because they don't even recognize that French is in decline. These are the same Liberals who refused to vote in 2021 to recognize that Quebecers form a nation. Does the Quebec lieutenant agree? The Honourable Minister for Official Languages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What my colleague just said is false. We are the first government to recognize the decline of French throughout the country and in Quebec. The language that's threatened in Canada is French. That's why we are going to do our fair share to address the situation. I would dare to say and to believe that the Bloc Québécois would want to see the federal government take this responsibility seriously. That's exactly what we're going to do. We have an ambitious bill. It will ensure that the Commissioner has more tools to do their work. And it will ensure that Francophones within Quebec and outside of it will be able to work in French and be served in French.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians can no longer afford to eat or heat their homes, let alone afford a home. And the Liberals, well, they plan to triple the carbon tax, which is going to cost our farmers more to grow our food and get it to the grocery store shelves. So it's no wonder that food banks in my communities, well, they're seeing record high demand with no end in sight. So, Mr. Speaker, when will this Prime Minister finally stop blaming everybody else for the pain that he's causing, take responsibility, and axe his destructive carbon tax?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As many people know, including a number of Conservative on the other side of this aisle, Mr. Speaker, carbon pricing is one of the most effective ways to fight against climate change. And starting April 1st, a family of four will get $386 in Alberta, $340 in Saskatchewan, $264 in Manitoba, and $244 in Ontario, 4 times a year, Mr. Speaker. We can fight climate change and support Canadians. That's exactly what we're doing on this side of the aisle.
The Honourable Member for Chilliwack-Hope.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, a record number of Canadian families can't even afford to buy basic groceries. Rent has gone through the roof, and the dream of home ownership has vanished for millions. Millions more are struggling just to keep the heat on in this winter. And the Prime Minister's solution is to triple the carbon tax on home heating. The Prime Minister needs to take responsibility for his actions. He needs to recognize the pain that he's causing. So why doesn't he do the right thing and just axe this destructive carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, one thing is clear, that over the last 7 years, this government has been there for Canadians. In fact, from 2015 to 2020, poverty in Canada reduced by 2.7 million Canadians. That's 782,000 children, 178,000 seniors. And you know what happened in 2015, Mr. Speaker? The government changed. The Liberals were elected and the Conservatives were out. Seems like something happened. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Chilliwack-Hope.
I'll tell you what's happened happened, Mr. Speaker, is millions of Canadians are using food banks every month, and this Liberal government brags about their record. People can barely afford to keep a roof over their heads and put food on their tables, and now the Prime Minister's solution to 40-year highs in inflation is to triple the carbon tax and raise prices even more on things as basic as their home heating. So why won't the Prime Minister finally take responsibility for his actions? Stop blaming everyone else. Do the right thing. Stop making things worse and axe this carbon tax.
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
After 8 years in opposition, the Conservatives seem to have not figured out that catchphrases and buzzwords don't actually improve the lives of Canadians. And Mr. Speaker, even worse, their ideology forces them to vote against things that improve the lives of Canadians. They voted against reducing taxes on Canadians. They voted against childcare. They voted against supports for businesses. Mr. Speaker, they vote against just about everything. While they oppose, we deliver. That's our job.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Under this Liberal government, the cost of rent for Canadians went up 60%. Liberals are letting corporate landlords rip off Canadian families by jacking up rent when they bring in a new tenant. Letting corporations and speculators turn our housing market into a casino for the ultra-wealthy is wrong. The Liberals have turned their backs on renters. When are the Liberals going to crack down on the profiteering of corporate landlords that is keeping families from finding a home that they can afford?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the member opposite claims, we have actually made sure that we take care of Canadian renters. We're the government that introduced the Canada Housing Benefit, which is now real in every province and territory in Canada. It is delivering an average of $2,500 to vulnerable renters across the country. In addition to that, we introduced the $500 one-time top-up to the existing Canada Housing Benefit, and nearly 2 million Canadian renters are now benefiting from that payment. Merci beaucoup.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Liberals announced a deal with Alberta to fund the creation of 20,000 private for-profit childcare spaces, even though the Alberta government has not made clear progress on creating the 42,000 nonprofit spaces it committed to build in its agreement with the federal government. In fact, the government's own childcare legislation says that public and nonprofit providers should be prioritized. Why are the Liberals turning their backs on Alberta families who need high-quality, public, nonprofit childcare spaces?
The Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker. You know, I was really delighted to be in Edmonton last week to make that important announcement of an additional 20,000 childcare spaces that are going to be created in Alberta. That's in addition to the 42,500 that were already announced when we signed the agreement. This means that we're delivering more affordable childcare for families in Alberta and right across the country. This is good news for Alberta families. It's good news for the Alberta economy, and I'm so thrilled that we can move forward with this, just like we're moving forward with Bill C-35, which is going to protect childcare for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Prairies Can announced a massive investment in Alberta with nearly $50 million in federal funds and the opening of a local Prairies Can office in Lethbridge. This dynamic hub will offer a direct link for local entrepreneurs and residents, advance new opportunities, drive economic expansion, and help hardworking Canadians create dependable jobs. Can the Minister update this House on the work he is doing in local communities across the prairies?
Well, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Calgary Skyview for that very important question and for all his hard work. Mr. Speaker, the prairies have unique needs and priorities, and only local communities know how to best address them. That's why our government is investing across the prairies by opening 7 new Prairies Canada offices across the prairies. And last week, I opened a brand new service location in Fort McMurray that will support the residents of northeastern Alberta in building a strong, competitive prairie economy that benefits everyone. Over the last 3 weeks, I've also announced more than $46 billion in federal investments, creating hundreds.
For Lake Lakeland.
Years of this Prime Minister, Canadians can barely afford food, fuel, heating our homes. Nicole from Vegreville is struggling because Liberals' carbon tax doubled her gas bill. She says, quote, I don't have an extra $400 to pay. How are Canadians supposed to live? But it's about to get worse when the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition triples their carbon tax. So when will the Prime Minister stop blaming everyone else, take responsibility and axe his destructive carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, earlier I spoke about families in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba that were going to start to receive the Climate Action Incentive rebate as of April 1st. But as of July 1st, families in Nova Scotia, PI, and Newfoundland will also be receiving the Climate Incentive rebate 4 times a year so that we can together tackle climate change, which is costing billions of dollars to Canadians. It's going to go up to $25 billion by 2025. And these Conservatives have nothing to say. They have no plan. They have nothing to say about climate change, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we will fight climate change, and we will do it by supporting Canadians.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
But the Liberals' carbon tax has driven up the cost of everything, as the PM said it's designed to do, while they've missed every single emissions target because it's tax grab, not an environmental plan. And it's hitting nonprofits hard, too. The Lloydminster Ag Exhibition faces, quote, crippling payments that already cost $30,000 a year in carbon tax alone. The building got major energy upgrades, but the carbon tax still hiked bills 30% and taxed away any savings. Conservatives will keep the heat on and take the tax off, but when will the Liberals take responsibility and axe their cruel carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister for Immigration.
Everyone in this House, I trust, wants to tackle the challenges that Canadian families are facing when it comes to affordability. What confuses me is the Conservatives seem not to understand that the plan to put a price on pollution is actually going to put more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 Canadian families. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is they're going to take that money from families so they can make it free to pollute, and the cost of pollution is extraordinary.
I just want to indicate that when your whip or your deputy whip is going like this, they're not trying to fly. They're trying to keep it quiet. The Honourable Minister for Immigration, please start again.
Mr. Speaker, it's important to understand that every member of this House wants to tackle the challenges families are facing when it comes to affordability. That's why we put in plan a place to put a price on pollution that will put more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 Canadian families. Their strategy is to take money from those families so they can make it free to pollute. And there is an enormous cost to pollution. I invite any member of this House to visit my community, see the silos that Hurricane Fiona tore apart, talk to the farmers who've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in their crops. It's hard to understand an argument that's going to do less for the environment and take money from families. I can't understand why the Conservatives double down on that strategy.
Foothills.
What is challenging for Canadians, and especially Canadian farmers, is the Liberals tripling their crippling carbon tax, which is fueling the food affordability crisis in Canada. And now the Liberal NDP Carbon Tax Coalition wants to triple that tax. The result of that is a typical Canadian farmer will pay $150,000 a year in carbon taxes alone. What Canadian farmer can absorb those taxes? I'll tell you, none. We are losing farms now due to bankruptcy and insolvency. When will the Prime Minister of misery understand that his tax has to go so farmers can grow?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems like the party opposite is worried about cost, but never talks about the cost that we are passing on to our kids and grandkids through the impacts of climate change. Billions of dollars that are accumulating year after year. We have an emergency here, Mr. Speaker, and the party opposite is simply not telling the truth to Canadians. We're already paying for the cost of climate change, and we need to find solutions. They have no solutions to offer, Mr. Speaker, none whatsoever. Thank you.
Member for Foothills.
Do you know who's misleading Canadians, Mr. Speaker? The Liberal government. When they say 8 out of 10 Canadians are going to get more in the carbon tax rebate than they get back. Reality, Canadian farmers get pennies on the dollar in return for the Liberals' farcical carbon tax rebate program. Canadian farmers can't afford fuel, fertilizer, or feed. And when we lose Canadian farms, that impacts every Canadian family who is struggling to put food on the table. Is the Prime Minister prepared that Conservatives will keep the heat on and take the tax off?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, let me tell you some Conservative voices who've historically supported a carbon price. Preston Manning, Stephen Harper, Doug Ford's chief budget advisor testified before the Senate in 2016 saying this was the most effective thing we could do to reduce emissions. We have discovered a way to put more money in the pockets of Canadians at the same time we have an effective policy to reduce emissions. If the Conservatives are concerned about the impact on farmers, come to my community. Come talk to the farmers who've lost silos. Come talk to them about the crops they've lost. The Haver Eagles Maple Farm has lost so many of their maple trees it will take half a century for them to become profitable again under current conditions. We will be there for families. We will protect the environment no matter what.
L'honorable. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, listen carefully to what the New York Post revealed this morning. Imagine New York is paying for bus tickets for asylum seekers who want to get to Roxham Road. The US National Guard is even helping with the distribution of tickets. The Americans must be laughing when they hear that Canada is negotiating to modernize the Safe Third Country Agreement. Imagine them laughing when we wonder why negotiations have been dragging on for 6 years. The Americans are ridiculing the federal government. Enough is enough. The minister can't suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement without the Americans. When is he going to stop being laughed at? The Honourable Minister for Immigration. Mr. Speaker, the solution proposed by the MP is not a good solution. It would just change the goalposts. I spoke to my counterparts in Quebec to find solutions and support Quebec. And in order...
domestic and international legal obligations that we are bound by. We will do right by vulnerable people who seek asylum in Canada. We will work with our provincial counterparts to make sure we are there for them so they don't face undue pressures as a result of trying to do the right thing for asylum seekers as well.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Well, the Americans don't want to fix Roxham Road because they're sending free buses. They're using Roxham to offload their own responsibilities towards asylum seekers. And those responsibilities today are being shouldered by Quebec schools, by our tireless but tired community organizations. Quebec does not have the resources to deal with asylum seekers from all over Canada. We can't add those from New York to the mix. When will the minister suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement, put an end to Roxham Road and distribute the reception of migrants throughout Canada, as the Quebec government has been asking? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Like my honourable colleague, the Minister for Immigration, has already noted, we have an agreement in principles to protect the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. That's one of Canada's values. We have many examples where we collaborate with the province of Quebec in order to welcome refugees. It's a good system, but yes, we must continue to strengthen our borders so that we can protect the integrity of our immigration system. So we will continue to work in collaboration with the province of Quebec.
South Shore St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal government's mismanagement, Nova Scotians have to choose each month which bill not to pay. Maynard, a senior on a modest fixed income, is using every free community resource to help pay for his heating, eating, and telephone. The plan to introduce and triple the carbon tax will only make things worse for Nova Scotians. To keep Maynard from starving and going homeless, will these Liberals axe their planned carbon tax for Nova Scotians?
Honourable Minister for Seniors.
We recognize the challenges that seniors are facing, and that's precisely why we have been there for Mr. Speaker. Unlike the party opposite, who has opposed every single measure that we have put forward to support seniors, or their leader, Mr. Speaker, who gave reckless advice to seniors to invest in crypto. Mr. Speaker, we have been there supporting seniors by doubling the GST credit, by increasing the guaranteed income supplement that has helped over 900,000 seniors, by increasing the old age security. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to have the backs of all Canadians, including seniors. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, the Liberals clearly don't know how to fix what they've caused. Maynard made $21,000 last year. That's $1,000 over the allowable limit for their one-off programs. But if he did qualify, the one-time payment, it does nothing for him for the next 11 months. The carbon carbon tax by design is inflationary. So here's an easy cure to help make eating and heating more affordable for Maynard. Cancel the Liberal plan to impose a cruel carbon tax on Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
I empathize with any member of this House who wants to do more to support vulnerable seniors from a low-income background in my home province of Nova Scotia. The reality is the programs we've been putting in place since 2015 have been designed specifically to help people like Maynard. Look at the increase to old age security. Look at the increase to the guaranteed income supplement. Look at putting a price on pollution that's actually going to put more money in the pockets of someone like Maynard, and I hope that member is not spreading misinformation. Mr. Speaker, every time we've tried to do something to support low-income people or to fight climate change, the honourable member and his colleagues oppose it. I note in particular the plan we put in place to cover the cost of heat pumps, to reduce the monthly cost of bills, which that member opposed.
Member for Barrie Innisfil.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, it's come down to this. Well, I was at community events this weekend. Several people I spoke to were telling me how hard it is to pay their bills. I heard stories of seniors living in cold because home heating costs have doubled. The carbon tax is not helping. Community fridges are being emptied as quick as they're being filled. Working families are using food banks, and moms are struggling to pay to keep the roof over their heads. When will the Prime Minister realize the pain he's causing, quit blaming everyone else for the problems he's created, and do something about it? And he can start by scrapping the costly carbon tax.
Honourable Minister for Family.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, we are actually doing something about it. In fact, since 2015, we've brought in a number of measures to make sure that life is more affordable for the lowest income Canadians, whether that's the Canada Child Benefit that's helping 9 out of 10 families, whether that is decreasing the eligible age for old age security from 67, which, by the way, the Conservatives tried to raise back down to 65, increasing old age security for those over 75 by 10%. Mr. Speaker, we have been there, will continue to be there, and Mr. Speaker, I just hope that if the Conservatives were sincere in their care for those vulnerable, they would support us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Dorval-Lachine. Mr. Speaker, every day food is wasted in production, processing, distribution, retail, food service, and in the home. In fact, Canada wastes more than half of its food supply. To counter this, our government introduced the Food Waste Reduction Challenge. This is an initiative with $20 million in funding. Can the Minister update this House on the progress of this programme? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has committed to reducing the economic, environmental and social consequences of food waste. A few days ago, I announced the 6 finalists for the innovative technology streams, who will now receive up to $450,000 to test their technologies to prolong the life of perishable foodstuffs or to transform food waste into new food or value-added products. I look forward to hearing who wins and to see the multiplication of their technology. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, for 8 years, this government has spent without any control. The government paid $173 million to a pharmaceutical company that had Philip Morris as a shareholder. Since 2003, the WHO does not recognize research when it is done by a tobacco company. Even better, Canada has signed this agreement. They signed it in 2003. Unfortunately, what happened was expected. The WHO did not recognize the research, and the minister said, well, I'm surprised. And then the company closed its doors. Why did the government even do a minimum level of verification? That is, telling Medicago to get rid of Philip Morris and then they would get help. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Government is disappointed to learn of Mitsubishi's decision. Recognizing the impacts of this decision we will have on their employees, we continue to be in discussion and we want to work with the Government of Quebec to assess next steps. Medicago is still an important player in Canada's biomanufacturing and life sciences ecosystem. We expect collaboration from all parties involved to ensure Canadian interests are protected. Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to work hard to ensure employees are protected, and our vaccine procurement is incredibly important in this country.
The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's astonishing to think that we're going to lose $750 million and we should be accomplice to that. It's shocking, sir. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, this government has become dependent on outside spin doctors for new ideas because, guess what? They don't have any of their own. They're exhausted and hopefully they've given up. Who's paying the price for all their foolishness? Well, Canadians are, Mr. Speaker. $104.7 million had been spent on contracts gifted to McKinsey, all because the Liberal government can't be bothered to do its own work. When will the Canadian people expect a full accounting for this ridiculous spending?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, all week long, no doubt all session long, you're going to hear ideological talking points, buzzwords, and the latest catchphrases from the leader of the Conservative opposition's Twitter. But, Mr. Speaker, what you will not hear from them is any plan. No plan on climate change. No plan to help on affordability. No plan to actually build the economy and get to prosperity for all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, they can keep tweeting. We'll keep delivering. That's our job.
The member for Cumberland Colchester.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very thankful for that response because we do have an ideology on this side. That's to stand up for Canadians. And after 8 years of spending, this Liberal government is out of money and Canadians are out of patience. Let me cite a few examples of their crazy spending, sir. $2 billion, $2 billion with a B, to a company that doesn't even exist. $100 million to the Liberal friends and, of course, to their buddies at McKinsey. And also up to $750 million, sir, to a company that is now going out of business and shutting its doors. When will this government stop spending and give Canadians a chance to thrive?
The Honourable Minister.
I see once again we have to set the record straight, and when it comes to standing on the side of Canadians and knowing who has invested through the pandemic and after in the lives of Canadians, it is this Liberal government who has done it. What did the Conservatives do when we put in childcare? How did they vote? They voted against. What happened when we tried to increase the workers' benefit, Mr. Speaker? They voted against. What happened when we improved supports for seniors, Mr. Speaker? They voted against. We vote for, they vote against. We're here for Canadians.
The honourable member for Fleetwood Port Kells. Okay, it's nice to see people talking to each other, but shouting across the floor is not the way to do that. If I can ask you to just keep it down so we can hear the question and then we can hear the response. The honourable member, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the ties between Canada and Hong Kong are strong and deep, but we share common values. Among them are respect for the rule of law, human rights, and individual freedom. Our government has launched several initiatives to help Hong Kong residents and their families work and live in Canada. So, could the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship inform the House about what more we're doing to support the people of Hong Kong?
Full Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, Canada stands resolutely alongside the people of Hong Kong. In 2021, my predecessor introduced new pathways that would allow Hong Kongers to come to Canada, including an open work permit program for recent graduates. Mr. Speaker, that program was set to expire this week, and I'm pleased to share with this House that I had the pleasure of being in Scarborough earlier today to announce that we would be extending the application period by a further 2 years and expanding the eligibility of the program to any Hong Kong resident who has graduated within the last 10 years as opposed to 5 under the previous program design. This program will bring more talented young Hong Kong residents to Canada, which is good for our communities and good for those seeking to come here.
Honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Alberta energy workers are calling on this government to step up with a major financial commitment to meet the challenge of Joe Biden's massive investments in clean tech. In Alberta, that would be 200,000 jobs alone. No wonder the Alberta Federation of Labour is calling this the biggest economic shift since the Industrial Revolution. Now, we know Conservatives don't believe in a clean energy future, but New Democrats do, because clean tech will pay good-paying union jobs in Alberta, Northern Ontario, and across Canada. So when will this government end their do-nothing approach and commit to major investments in this budget to ensure a clean tech revolution for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Far
from a do-nothing approach, Mr. Speaker, let me assure this House and to all members that we stand firmly on the side of workers in this country and the workers who have built our energy industry in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador, those who have proudly built our oil industries and energy industries. They are exactly the people that we need to lower emissions, create jobs, and ensure the future competitiveness of one of our absolute most important industries. And we have stood with workers every step of the way. More to the point, sir, more to the point, Mr. Speaker, we have made sure that they lead this. They are the ones who built it, and they will continue to lead it. Thank you.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, February 6th, finds us 18 days away from a horrific anniversary. I don't know how the rest of my colleagues in this place feel, Mr. Speaker, but on February 24th, 2022, who could have believed that in this day and age there'd be a land war in Europe and that Vladimir Putin would do the unthinkable, threaten nuclear arms and attack Ukraine? My question to the Prime Minister is, what is Canada doing to press for peace talks, to press for a negotiated solution? Arms won't end the war.
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, since the very beginning, Canada stands shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. Since 2015, Canada has trained over 34,000 Ukrainian armed forces members. We've put on the table over $5 billion of military aid, and we will stand with Ukraine in its fight for security, solidarity, and sovereignty. And the decision relating to peace and Ukraine's future will come from Ukraine itself, and Canada will be there all along the way.
That's all the time we have for question period today. Comme il est 15 heures.
It being 3:10 p.m., pursuant to order made on Thursday, June 23, 2022, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Ms. Dancho relating to the business of supply.
All in the members. Thank you.